Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, with plenty to recap after a super packed past few days in the sports world. You know I've got my sleeves rolled up, ready to rock and share my thoughts on all that went down, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first-timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we have a weekend in the books when it comes to the NBA and to a certain extent the NHL, which I'll get to right after I discuss what's happening on the hardwood. But the overall picture of the weekend here with the 8 games already in the books, and you had blowouts aplenty, whether it was in OKC, that was beyond ugly, and of course I'll unpack that, or in Indiana, where we had some fireworks at the end, which could mean a rather very juicy and hopefully a very intriguing series between the Bucks and Pacers. And then you had the Cavaliers pull away from the Heat. But the two big storylines coming out of the weekend, and I'll start off with Saturday night, and even with last night, the back end of the quadruple header in the NBA. And I know that this could be the sky is falling in LA or overreactions throughout, because everybody looks at a game one as if the world is coming to an end, especially for the cities that have fans that root for these teams. And I have to start off with the Lakers, because what you saw there on Saturday night, especially after that second quarter where the Timberwolves went on a 38-20 spree there to put themselves in good stead throughout the rest of the game. And even though it was not a vintage Anthony Edwards performance, he had 24 points in the game. Jaden McDaniels led with 25. You also had some contributions there by Julius Randle, where if he's going to do that throughout the course of this series, that can mean curtains for the Lakers. But it's only one game. We can't get crazy, despite the fact that they lost 117-95. LeBron James, for his standard, actually had one of the worst games you could possibly imagine when it comes to him in a playoff scenario. He only had, 16 points in the game, was pretty much a non-factor. Defensively, they got pushed around by the physicality of the Timberwolves, as evidenced by the head coach there, JJ Redick, who said that we weren't prepared for it. And obviously that falls on him. JJ, we know he's going to be accountable not only for himself, but for his team. But that was one big giant shock over the weekend, if you ask me, considering that they were not competitive. And even though Luka Doncic, and I'm going to get to him in a second, scored 37 points, but they were a quiet 37 considering the way the game played out. And the one image that's lasting here from Saturday night until game 2 tomorrow night will be Anthony Edwards draining that three in Luka's face where he pointed at him. Who knows what was said there? And I'm sure Luka's going to put that in the memory bank. And more on Luka in a second, because I have something that I've observed, and I actually kind of wonder with the Laker forward whether or not that this is going to be something that will plant the seed in his head moving forward in this series and maybe the rest of the playoff, or is this going to go the other way where maybe he's not going to rise to the occasion? That's right. This may be controversial, but I got to come out and say it because that's just in the gut. That's not for clickbait. That's not to get everybody crazy just to come up with some stupid storyline. There's going to be some legitimacy behind this, so you're going to have to stay tuned for that. But as far as the Lakers, you just flush this game in the toilet. You don't even think about it from a standpoint of psychologically or to think that the Timberwolves are going to be in their heads. I mean, listen, that is pretty much a non-factor here, if you ask me. I'm sure they're going to come out raring to go. I would think they're going to even the series after tomorrow night. But because of that layoff of 72 hours where it's going to sit with the Lakers, that could go either way. It could burn in them to the point where they're going to come out of the gate and just run the Timberwolves out of the gym. Or is it a thing where it's going to sit on them to the point where once they come out and the T-Wolves are going to look for some blood and maybe try to put the clamp on the Lakers to go back to Minnesota up 2-0? I don't know if that's going to be the case, but that could be a thing with a young coach, rookie head coach, and maybe with some players on the team other than LeBron that certainly do not know their way around this. And even though LeBron is going to be the ringleader, he's going to corral everybody to say, hey, pipe down, we got this, let's just go back to our game. As he said in the post-game, control the controllables. And if they do that, they should be fine going back to the Twin Cities tied at 1. But the one thing I want to talk about with Luka Doncic is this. There aren't many people built like him in the NBA. He is a guy that is a stone cold assassin, and you could probably count on one hand. He's definitely built in the mold of Larry Bird, of Michael Jordan, of Kobe Bryant, that closer that you need to have in games where you know you could either put the game away or even put the series away. As we've seen in years past, whether it was in the bubble, down in Orlando in 2020 in that Game 4, I believe it was the opening round series against the Clippers, where he drained that deep three to tie the series against the Clips, although they eventually lost the series. But you got a glimpse of what Luka Doncic was like on a big stage. And then fast forward to last year, Game 2 in the Western Conference Finals, where in front of Rudy Gobert, the dagger three that he had, and then yelling in the direction of Gobert. And I understand there's no love lost between the two. And ironically, they're facing up against one another in this series right now in the first round. But you saw how he is just able to not only take over games offensively, we know how brilliant he is when it comes to handling the ball, dishing the ball, taking big shots, not afraid of the big moment. That we understand. But the one thing that we've also seen that may have gone under the radar and maybe has been brought to light here, especially what we saw there Saturday night. We saw in an NBA final how Jaylen Brown and even to a certain extent Jason Tatum have been able to corral him, throw him off his game a little bit. Maybe the home court had an advantage with that Celtic crowd looking for a title for the first time since the 2008 season. So maybe there was a factor there where Luka was thrown off his game psychologically, but Jaylen Brown certainly gave him fits, and the Celtic defense did whatever it took to not have him dominate in that finals, as we saw that the Celtics won in 5. And then remember that Game 3 last year, where he fouled out of the game, he literally fell apart, was looking to the refs, going to the bench to Jason Kidd, his coach, to say, hey, let's get a review here, where he knew that that was a foul. And certainly the Celtics threw him way off his game. A player who, as we said, dominates the ball as well as will be able to show up in a big moment. And on top of that, has that killer mentality. But because of that Celtics series, and even the comments that Brian Windhorst made, if you recall, the way he acted like just a petulant child that was looking like a spoiled baby there on the court when he got that 6th foul, when he looked to the bench, and as we have seen time after time after time, is always complaining, always bitching and moaning to the referees, to the extent where it's even kind of hard to root for him, despite the fact that he's just a brilliant offensive player. But then now, let's fast forward. So after that finals, and then of course everything that had transpired throughout the course of the year, the trade, etc., but that's a whole other set of encyclopedias. But now let's get to Game 1. And with the T-Wolves manhandling them physically, and even though Luka got his points, but Anthony Edwards, he's another guy that is built with that assassin's DNA. A guy that I understand he hasn't won anything, and you can say the same for Luka Doncic, despite the fact that he did make a finals appearance. But for Anthony Edwards, he could go mano-a-mano with Luka. He's a guy that certainly will not cower or back away from the spotlight or a big moment. And even though the game was out of hand, where he made that 3 in front of Luka, I believe it was, about 8 minutes to go, and the T-Wolves, I believe, were up by, off the top of my head, what was it, maybe 15, 16 points. But just knowing that he was able to land that 3 and point at him with his fingers as if to say, I got you, my man, and if you're going to think you're going to try to get at me, this is going to be a long series. Now, I don't know what was said. I don't know what was bandied about between the two megastars, but I wonder a little bit about the psyche of Luka Doncic in that regard. That's not to say he's going to back away. That's not to say that he's just going to bow down to Anthony Edwards or the T-Wolves, because I'm sure he's going to have a moment where he's going to rise to the occasion and he's going to throw the proverbial middle fingers at the T-Wolves or any opponent that's in his way. But based on last year in the finals, and based on maybe even just that Game 1, where if the T-Wolves are going to try to do whatever it takes to wear down Luka Doncic, maybe they saw some of the tape from the finals last year, and not only that, but the experience of playing against Luka in a Western Conference final, maybe that also had something to do with what happened there Saturday night. Now, just like the coach of the T-Wolves, Chris Finch, said, it's only one game. We can't get crazy. We can't look at it from a standpoint that the series is over. But maybe, just maybe, there's a psychological advantage for the T-Wolves going up against Luka Doncic. Now, there's plenty of basketball that needs to be played, obviously starting there tomorrow night. But I will say this. You do have to take into question, just a little bit, that Luka Doncic could be fragile. Could be. That may be with a giant capital C, but at the same time, his recent track record has shown us that could be the case. So that's what you have there with that series. And then the other big game that I feel as if a lot of people look at the Warriors as maybe going on a run here after beating Memphis in the play-in game. And then last night looked like they had to sweat a little bit at the end because they had a big lead there in the second half. They looked like they were just going to go running away into the Houston night as they had a 23-point lead. And then the Rockets actually cut it to 3 before Steph Curry and his Magic, as well as Jimmy Butler, who had another big-time playoff Jimmy performance as they won 95-85. And now the Rockets, as I talked about on Thursday, where this is a team that's young, has little to no experience when it comes to postseason play. And even though their head coach has been to a final in the one full year that he coached as a head coach, and a team that he lost to in the final being the Golden State Warriors, and now that it's come full circle for Ime Udoka, but now the Rockets are going to have their backs up against the wall because they do not want to go down 0-2 in this series back to San Francisco, where the Warriors are going to look for blood in their own right to see whether or not that they could maybe not sweep. I would think the Rockets will respond there in game 2, but last night was certainly not necessarily a surprise, but just from the standpoint of Houston, maybe there were some butterflies in the stomach, some pregame jitters, and it just carried over. Although they had a very good first quarter, but the second quarter was certainly a terrible one for the Rockets. They were outscored, I believe, 29-13 in that quarter, and even though they tried to recover there with that late push from the middle part of the third quarter into the fourth, but they fell short. And now the Warriors are up 1-0, and I'm sure they're going to try to go for that 2-0 series lead to take it back to the Bay Area with a commanding lead and maybe try to just ice this series in their home court. But obviously, again, a lot of basketball to be played, and that's part of the overreactions that we have here after all these game ones are in the books. But those two storylines were the biggest ones of the weekend. The Lakers losing in just astounding fashion, and the Warriors winning that game only because if the Rockets would have won, people would have said, uh-oh, what's going to happen in Golden State? But you'd expect the Rockets to at least hold serve in home court, which they didn't do there last night. So those are the two big storylines. I mean, other than that, you really don't have a lot to chew on. Now, with the games on Saturday in particular, where Indiana ran the Bucks off the court, and even though at the end of the game you had that back and forth between Damian Lillard, who could play as early as tomorrow night there in game 2 for the Bucks, which would be huge because I'm sure they're going to need him in the worst way. Obviously, Giannis can't do it all, despite the fact that he probably does have a cape underneath his jersey, considering how wonderful he plays in these games. He plays hard, he scratches and claws, he's like a bull in a china shop. But certainly he does need to have a Robin to his Batman, and maybe Lillard could come to the rescue, even though he's going to come back from the situation with the blood clot that he had, and hopefully that doesn't rear its ugly head at any point upon his return throughout the rest of at least this series and maybe beyond. But for the Bucks, who even though with that exchange at the end, and hopefully Lillard comes back, because that's going to add a lot of spice to the rest of the series. But if that's not going to be the case, if he does come back in game 3, they could be staring at an 0-2 deficit going back home, which you would expect Indiana to win their home games, but still you do not want to try to get yourself out of a deep hole where you're going to have to win 4 of the next 5 in order to win the series, including 2 games in Indiana. So for the 2 games at the most, you would think, because if it does go 7 games, I'm thinking 4 out of 5. I mean, it could run the table and sweep if they are down 0-2, but the likelihood of that happening is slim and none. So for the Pacers, right now, they're in good shape to see whether or not if Lillard does come back or does not. But now that Doc Rivers certainly has his work cut out for him, to hope that Lillard does come back into the picture for the Bucks to go ahead and see if they could even the series before going back home. Then you had the Clippers and Nuggets. Now, I didn't watch this game, and I'm kind of sorry I didn't, but only because I was on location filming and taking the temperature of the Knicks fan in a vlog that's going to come out tomorrow. So for those watching or even listening for that matter, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, my latest vlog will be out tomorrow as the Knicks fan. How do they feel coming into this postseason? Not only playing against the Pistons, which I'll get to next in the, obviously, segment after the Clippers and Nuggets, but for those that are wondering, especially in the New York area, how the Knicks fan, do they have their chest puffed out? Are they tempered a little bit? And I understand it's more of a regional thing, but considering the Knicks fan and they have not won a championship in now 52 years, I think it's interesting to hear their take, as well as some Pistons fans and even some other fans. So just keep that on your radar, as that'll come through the channel tomorrow. But for Clippers Denver, because I was out on site at the Garden, this was a fascinating game, and this looks like it's going to be a long series, as we talked about there on Thursday. And to think the hero of this game was none other than Russell Westbrook, making key shots. He had the key defensive play there late in the game. The game was pushed into overtime, and even though James Harden had a good game, 32 points, shot well from the field, and Nikola Jokic is going to do Nikola Jokic things. But Russell Westbrook was a factor there, as we've seen down the stretch of the season, blowing open layups, and of course his shot selection is always dubious, as we know. But if Russell Westbrook can control that and continue to play with that just endless energy that he has, to me, he is the Energizer Bunny. As he gets older, he seems to get better when it comes to just his enthusiasm and his conditioning, etc. But we know that you have to hold your breath at times when he's on the court late in games, because you don't want him taking bad shots. You don't even want to take him any shots, for that matter. And defensively, again, he's not a guy that's going to make all NBA defensive teams. But what you saw there the other day on the inbounds pass, where Harden knocked the ball out of bounds and they got the ball back and they salvaged a Game 1 win. And the Nuggets, as we talked about, stumbling into this postseason. The Clippers were coming in hot, and now with a big Game 2 on the horizon, which is tonight, let's see if the Clippers can get the series tied and back to LA to see if this is going to be a long series. Because if the Nuggets go up 2-0, a lot of people are going to think that this could be no more than 6, maybe 5, dare I say. I still think this will be a long series, but certainly Russell Westbrook had his fingerprints on the end of that game. And kudos to him. Obviously, he's had a stellar career, despite the fact that with all the bad nicknames in reference to his shooting, I don't even need to get into that. If you're an NBA fan or follow Russell Westbrook's career, you know what I'm referring to. And for him to at least get the shine for Game 1, kudos to him with that. Then you had the Knicks and Pistons, which was a very hotly contested matchup. And to think, I know if you're a Piston fan, you got to be sick to your stomach knowing that you had a 98-90 lead. And for Tobias Harris to have 22 points in the first half, which was shocking to say the least, because Harris is a guy that floats in and out of these games, more out than in. But he gave you a contribution there in the first half. And Jalen Brunson wasn't great, shot 4 for 13. Cade Cunningham the same. But when the Pistons had a 98-90 lead with about 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, I'm sure the Knicks fan was thinking, all right, we got to go on a run now. And we're going to have to get ourselves in a position where we can win the game at the end. Well, they certainly did get themselves in position, because from that point on, they went on a 21-0 run. The Pistons just imploded with errant passes, inbound passes, just sloppy play. Knicks converting fast breaks into points. And the Knicks went going away 123-112 and now have a 1-0 series lead with Game 2 tonight. So the Pistons, they're inexperienced, and certainly maybe some nerves and tightness there in that fourth quarter. Knowing that they had a lead, they could have played a little bit loosey-goosey and relaxed. But they played tight. They certainly were just inept on the offensive end, just giving the ball to the Knicks, it seems, at will. And the Pistons now got to lick their chops and come back for a Game 2, which to me is going to be a must-win. Because even if they go back to Detroit and they tie this series to come back to the Garden, of course, the Knicks have the home court advantage. And as we've seen here throughout the years, despite the fact that the Knicks lost last year to Indiana, but they fell apart there with their health at the end, as you know. But they do not want to have to come back to the Garden and either have to fight for their lives down 3-1 or worse, or I should say, or at best, have a scenario where it's 2-2, but knowing that the Knicks have the home court advantage, and we know those fans are rabid and just ready to celebrate at any turn. So that's what you have there with that game. And then in the games yesterday, there's nothing to add. I know Memphis did what they had to do against the Mavs there on Friday night with the play-in tournament. Even though you had Anthony Davis with a monster performance, he had 40 points, but nothing else pretty much from the Mavs. And the Grizzlies, led by Jaren Jackson with 25. And even though Ja, with the ankle that he suffered, he tweaked it there in that Golden State game, had 22-9. Good game for him, but at the same time, it was a situation where the Mavs just ran out of gas. They gave it all they had against the Kings there just a few nights prior to that game, and then had a situation where they just didn't have enough in the tank. in order to outlast the Grizzlies there to get into the big body of work in the Western Conference. And then the Grizzlies yesterday, although John Morant says we're not going to play like that again, well, I'll believe it when I see it, because that was just an atrocity. You had to avert your eyes. And yes, we could talk about the turnaround. They went from playing late Friday night and then had the 1 o'clock game there yesterday afternoon. And I get it. That was a rough go for them. They had no shot to win the game. If they would have lost by 20 or even 30 for that matter, you would have said, all right, let's just chalk it up to them having that quick turnaround and not getting acclimated, where the Thunder had the complete full week of rest and practice, etc., where you knew that the Grizzlies were going to be no match. But to lose by 51, I mean, that is inexcusable. I get it. You're in a slumber, early game. You're not at peak performance, tired, etc. You flew into Oklahoma City, which is not a long flight, but you flew in late and certainly trying to get your sea legs under yourselves for game one, and you lose, like I said, 25, 30 points. Still embarrassing, but all right, we get it. 51, there is just absolutely no reason. And they just mailed it in. And it was just hard to watch, if you ask me. But let's see how they rebound in game two. Let's see if John Morant backs up those words. And I don't want to have it come down to a couple of possessions where they lose by a bucket. Now, granted, they're not going to lose by 50, but I'd rather see them win the game and to back up his words in victory, as opposed to just putting up 30 points with 8 rebounds and 9 assists, and then they lose by 12. I mean, to me, that's not going to really cement my thought process as an NBA fan to think that, oh, all right, well, they certainly made better strides than they did in game one. Well, please, even if they lose by 12, it's still better than losing by 50. But that isn't a significant leap. To me, the leap is have a lead there late and somehow, some way, find a way to secure that game so you could go back to Memphis tied at 1. That's how I look at it. So that's what you have there. The Celtics win against the Orlando Magic. Now, Orlando was feisty. They were up by a point at the half, but the Celtics were able to turn on the Jets there in the third quarter. Jaylen Brown comes back from the knee injury. Played fine, 30 minutes, 16 points, made a contribution. Okay, but let's see how he plays moving forward, because to me, it's about Jaylen Brown later on in the postseason as opposed to it is now. But you had a big scare there with Jason Tatum falling to the TD Garden floor where he was holding onto his wrist. I thought maybe it was his knee, because to me, that would have been just it for the Celtics' chances of repeating. But then again, he did land on his wrist. It was his right wrist, his shooting arm, or shooting hand. And he stayed in the game. He missed both free throws, but then a few minutes later, he did make a 3. And in the postgame, he said that his wrist is fine. Even Joe Mazzulla assured that everything is fine with him. And with the Celtics not playing until Wednesday, I'm sure he's going to get a lot of treatment and rest, etc. So he should be fine moving forward. So talk about dodging a missile there if you're a Celtic fan, like yours truly, of course. But Derek White was the key to this game. 7 threes, 30 points, masterful performance there. And even though Paolo Banchero got 36, but nothing else to be said there by the Magic as they try to regroup and see what they can do to get back in the series there on Wednesday. And then you had the Cavaliers, where the Heat, 4 play-in tournament victories, the most ever in the play-in tournament, I guess you could say, era. And for them to be the first 10 seed to make it into the complete body of work there in the Eastern Conference. And even though they were competitive, but the Cavaliers pulled away behind Donovan Mitchell's 30. And how about Ty Jerome? One of the 6 men of the year between he and Peyton Pritchard. And who knows, they may even go at it there in a conference final if it so turns out to be that way. But for the Cavaliers, there were too much for the Heat there. And even though the Heat had to turn around in their own right, considering they played Friday night. Now, granted, the game was last night, so no excuse for them. Maybe a little bit more for the Grizzlies, despite the fact losing by 50. I get it. Put that aside. But for the Heat, they were unable to match anything that the Cavs had, especially throughout the course of 48 minutes. Tyler Hero, who's going to be the guy here moving forward, and even Davion Mitchell, who was huge in the game against Atlanta in the overtime, who had the 3 big 3-pointers to go along with what Tyler Hero had done. But Bam Adebayo gave you a contribution yesterday, and he's going to need to put up some points here. He just can't give you 16 and 10. He's going to have to step his game up to put up a 24-point performance as he did last night, and to give some added offensive flexibility to go along with Tyler Hero. And if Duncan Robinson comes off the bench and they don't really have a good offensive team, So let's see what the Heat could do as they try to bounce back from the Game 1 loss there to the Cavs. And that's what you have. That's your NBA pretty much in a big nutshell over the first 2 days, all the Game 1s in the books. And when we get to Thursday, I'll break it all down and see where the lay of the land is for the association. And just to take a look at the schedule before we move it along. So tonight you have a situation, just 2 games, where you have the Knicks and Pistons, Game 2 tonight at 7:30 on TNT, followed by the Nuggets and Clippers in Denver, both games again on TNT. Tomorrow you have a triple header where Milwaukee and Indiana at 7 on NBA TV, followed by Memphis, Oklahoma City on TNT at 7:30, and then the 10 o'clock game, Minnesota at the Lakers, will round out your triple header there. And then Wednesday, another triple header, all on TNT, except for Miami, Cleveland, 7:30 on NBA TV. But then you have Orlando and Boston at 7, followed by Golden State, Houston at 9:30, which will lead us into Thursday's podcast as we'll regroup and obviously recap all that had taken place there. All right, anything else to the association? I just want to make sure. I think that's it, what I have there. Yes, now let's turn our attention as I lace up my skates and we'll take a trip around the National Hockey League. Now, you do not have a scenario where all of the 8 playoff series has taken place. You still have 3 Game 1s that need to drop the puck and start their series, with 2 of them tonight, where you have Montreal and Washington, followed by Edmonton at LA, and then tomorrow you have Game 1 of Florida and Tampa, which is a fascinating series. And if you hadn't listened to my Stanley Cup playoff preview, all you got to do is go back to the previous episode there on Thursday to get my take on that. So I'm not going to rehash those series as they will be underway tonight and tomorrow. But the overall picture of the first 5 series is not much to really speak of. If anything, Dallas may be in trouble. Colorado is flying high, and of course they're playing against one another, so that's the one thing. Winnipeg, you want to say they dodged a bit of a missile there in that Game 1? All right, you could talk about that. And will Mitch Marner finally get the piano off his back? Although it's one game, and this is all the overreactions from Game 1s, those may be the top 3 storylines, because with Minnesota-Vegas, I know Brett Hoden had the 2 goals there, including an empty netter, as they beat the Wild 4-2. And then you had Carolina, where the Devils are dropping like flies, unfortunately. We know about the injury with Jack Hughes. Luke Hughes, who was actually out and then had to come back, his brother, the defenseman. Then you had a scenario where Cody Glass, as well as Brandon Dillon, were both out. And I believe they could have brought Dillon back, but for precautionary reasons, they kept him behind. And now it's a scenario where the Devils look like they're just going to put this roster together with Scotch tape and bubblegum just to see if they could get a win, let alone even get past this series, as the Hurricanes win Game 1 behind 2 goals from Logan Stankoven. So we would think that the Panthers, because I get Carolina and the Panthers and the Hurricanes, I get them mixed up considering they play in the same state, the football team to the hockey team. But for the Hurricanes, you would think they're going to be fine here in this series, not only because of the Devil injuries, but because they are, as I've said a million times, steady team, 4 lines, they come at you in waves. Although I'm a little bit nervous about the goaltender and the one Frederick Anderson, but Game 1, they were certainly dominant and certainly showed why they're the favorites in this series. So that's what you have there with Jersey and Carolina. But for the other series, Mitch Marner gets off the deck, a goal and 2 assists, 6-2 over Ottawa, as the Senators maybe has that happy to be here moment, considering they have not been in the postseason in forever. And the Maple Leafs, a lot of people know that the spotlight is on them. They could possibly have a long postseason run. Now, granted, they still have a potential Florida or Tampa waiting in the wings, but that's for the next series, and they certainly can't worry about that. But with a dominant 6-2 performance there, including a goal by John Tavares, William Nylander gets into the mix. So if you're a Maple Leaf fan, you're feeling good, but you know what? You've seen this movie before, so I'm sure you're tempering it with just a game-by-game, even shift-by-shift mentality. But good start there by the Leafs. Then you had Winnipeg with Kyle Connor scoring that goal, tied at 3 there late, with a minute 33 to go, and then they tack on an empty netter there late. But for the Jets, as I talked about, you want to really put the heat on a team that won the President's Trophy, that, I'll say it, I'm sure a lot of people in the hockey world knew that the Jets were going to be good, but did they think they were going to win a President's Trophy and have just a lot of expectations to get themselves on a cup run? I didn't think that way back in October, but now here we are in the middle of April, and they were able to stave off, which would have been a crushing Game 1 loss. And with the psyche of their goaltender, Connor Hellebuyck from last year, just getting ambushed by Colorado. And I understand that's last year, but there has to be some scar tissue on the goaltender, knowing that he's a guy, one of the top goalies in the sport, and could win another Vezina trophy. Come on, this is the playoffs. This is where the money's on the line. You got to deliver here. And although that a 3-1 lead in the game and the Blues came back, but thanks to Kyle Connor with the big goal there, they were able to survive and win a Game 1 against the Blues, who, although stumbled in the last week of the season, but remember had a 12-game winning streak, which propelled them into this playoff spot. So let's see if they rebound after a Game 1 defeat. And then even the bigger story. Now, talk about a team that has a mass unit. It's the Dallas Stars. Now, Jason Robertson, who was declared week to week, and it looks like he's not even going to play in the series, one of their top goal scorers on the team. And then you can't forget Miro Heiskanen, who's been out since January with a knee injury. And a lot of people thought that maybe he would suit up for Game 1 or maybe Game 2. Well, they're going to need him quick, fast, in a hurry. And who knows if he's going to be available to play in Game 2. But the Avalanche, they are just going to, I would think, be a juggernaut here, at least from Game 1. Maybe I'm a little bit premature to say that, but when you look at what happened there in Game 1, Jake Ottinger in net for the Stars was not good, and I understand he had a couple of weird goals, deflections, and things of that nature. But with Nathan MacKinnon with a goal and 2 assists, and think about this, you also have to remember Mikko Rantanen, who got traded from Colorado to Carolina and then got shipped to Dallas there before the deadline, and a guy that I'm sure the Stars fans are going to be looking at to say, hey, you better step it up here, considering he signed an 8-year, $96 million deal. And for Rantanen to go up against his former mates, which I know has a soft spot in him, but those soft spots need to be put aside. And now it's got to be just a full-on assault by the former Avalanche player to make his mark in this series and to get the Stars not only just even, but maybe from a standpoint to get themselves deep into this Stanley Cup playoffs. So Game 2, which we'll go through the schedule in a moment, will be on the horizon, and the Stars got to wipe this one away and start fresh as if Game 1 didn't even happen. But we all know it's already in the books and they're down a game. And it's weird with the Stars because remember, last year, weren't they down 0-2 to the Vegas Golden Knights in the first round before they came back and won the series? And it's weird. They do it the hard way, and they've been to back-to-back Western Conference Finals. But based on that performance yesterday, they may be thinking, well, we got them right where we want them, considering their recent playoff resume and what they've done here as far as their track record goes. But Colorado looks like they could be a team on a mission based on what we saw there on Saturday night. And now it's up to the Stars to bounce back from that, hopefully led by Rantanen and even Jake Ottinger, who needs to play a lot better if they want to be in the series. And then, like I mentioned, you have the other 3 series, which I've talked about. Alexander Ovechkin ended up with 897 at season's end, so he's 3 away from 900, but who knows? As I mentioned, after him breaking Wayne Gretzky's all-time career goal-scoring record, if by any means, and talk about spotlights on a team similar to Winnipeg, it's also on Washington. Top seed in the East, had a big-time year. Nobody expected them to have that type of year, considering the way they played over the last few years. But with the magic of Ovechkin getting Gretzky's record and now at 897, and maybe if they are able to get through the Eastern Conference into a Stanley Cup final, and dare I even say win it, will Alex Ovechkin even come back for another season, considering he has the record and would also go off into the sunset with another Stanley Cup championship to boot? I think that would be the recipe and certainly would be the best way to end a Hall of Fame career. But that's not me. That's for Ovechkin to deal with. But something just to keep in mind as we move it along here throughout this postseason. And then, like I mentioned, Florida, Tampa, where Florida's coming in just hobbling. Who knows what's going to happen with Matthew Tkachuk? I'm sure he's a game-time decision. I believe I mentioned that there last week on the Thursday preview. But we'll keep an eye on that. And then Edmonton, LA, meeting for the 4th time here in the last 4 years. These teams know each other very well, but now the Kings have the home ice as opposed to Edmonton having it at least the last 2 years. So we'll wait and see on that, but I gave you my predictions there the other day with those series. So if you, one more time, please feel free to go back and check on that. Couple of quick notes before I move it along. You had a couple of firings there in the NHL, and both no shock. Well, maybe one a little bit of a shock, because is anybody really paying to the Anaheim Hockey Club when it comes to their head coach? But I'll get to that in a second. But to me, which was no surprise with the Rangers, where Peter Laviolette just 2 years on the job, and last year, as we know, with a team that had the President's Trophy. I believe they had the President's Trophy, did they not? We saw them fizzle out there in a conference final against the Panthers, and then this year they got up to a tremendous start. And what was that for? They just fell apart there in the middle and toward the end of the season, where they did not make it to the postseason, and Peter Laviolette axed, gone, done. So that means another head coach is going to walk through that door right before training camp, or maybe even before the end of the playoffs are concerned. So that was a tough blow for a Ranger team. And as we know, throughout the course of the season, they made trades left and right, Jacob Trouba, and sending people packing here, there, and everywhere just to try to salvage whatever was left of the season. And of course, they fell short. So for the Rangers, I know that was a tough loss, and with all the talent that they have on their team, and I'm sure there's going to be question marks on what they're going to do with some personnel there for the GM, Chris Drury, but hey, that's for the Rangers to deal with. But there was no surprise that Laviolette was going to be shown the door, and he's been on a million teams, and he's coached a million teams as it is to begin with, so who knows if he resurfaces elsewhere. But with that being said, he is gone, and then Greg Cronin, the former Mighty Duck coach, is also gone. Now listen, I don't know if the Mighty Ducks had, or they once were called the Mighty Ducks, based on the movie, the Disney movie many years ago. But for the Anaheim Ducks, I don't know if that's all on Cronin's shoulders. We know that the Ducks have not had a good team here over the last several years, and maybe there had to be a fall guy there in Southern California, so be it. Let's see what they're going to do here in this offseason to try to get themselves back on the beam as far as, forget about even relevancy, but maybe just in the Western Conference to compete to maybe get a playoff spot there next year. And then the NHL, their attendance has gone up even more. 23 million, a record. Good for them. I have to give them some props. Now, I understand you have outdoor games and things of that nature, which is going to increase that. But the NHL is as good as golden, considering that people have come out through the turnstiles in this digital age that we live in with streaming games and staying at home and not having to flock out to the arena. But kudos to them with the attendance. And let's see if they have a good Stanley Cup playoff here and even a final. Because unlike the NBA, we know these first round series, they could be just brutal, notwithstanding Lakers, T-Wolves, and maybe to a certain extent Warriors and Rockets. But we know that the first round in the NHL could be a crapshoot. Any one of these teams could, as far as top seeds, they could go out in the first round, where in the NBA seldom does a one seed exit stage right after the first round. So just keep that in mind as we move it along. So good news for the NHL there when it comes to their attendance. All right, and also one last thing. My over-under totals, they were awful. I didn't talk about that the other day because there's nothing really to speak about. 2 and 4 are my over-unders. In fact, my overs, I lost on all three. Boston 99.5, Nashville 99.5, and the Rangers 100.5. Ooh, I might as well just keel over and throw up just reciting that. And my unders had Pittsburgh under 90.5, that was a win. Blackhawks under 73.5, that was a win. But then I had Calgary 81.5, that was a loss. 2 and 4, right in the toilet. Just like my thoughts and just thinking about this. So let's move it along here. As I get in the batter's box, and we'll talk a little baseball on a couple of interesting developments here that revolve around the New York teams. I don't want to make this New York centric, but to me, these are the two big storylines that are heading into the week. And I got to start off with my beloved Mets. Here they are, 15-7, first place in the National League East. And if you recall, just 2 years ago, after winning 101 games in a regular season in 2022 and fizzling out in the wild card round against the San Diego Padres, they started off the following year at 14-7. All right, that's what you want to do, right? Get off to a great start. You're winning 2/3 of your games. This year, they're winning a bit more than that, and you're feeling good if you're a Met fan. But what happened there in 2023? Bottomed out. Nowhere near the playoffs and nowhere to be found in the National League. And then last year, we know about the slow start. That's why I said this during the baseball preview. Check those receipts. I want the Mets to get off to a good start, of course, but it doesn't mean anything because they got off to a good start 2 years ago and went right down the chute. And last year, we're 24-35 on June 2nd, and we know what happened after that. So now, let's get to the moment, to the now, to today. 15-7. Their starting pitching has been far more than what I could ever expect here in the first 22 games of the season. But here's the question you have to ask. Is this start legitimate, or should there be an asterisk next to it. And people are going to say, whoa, JAYREELZ, you're a Met fan. Why would you even come out and say that? Well, I say that for this reason only. And I understand you can only play the opponents that are in front of you. You can't look at the schedule and say, well, hey, we're supposed to beat up these teams. And yes, rightfully so. But 15-7, and who have they played here throughout the first 3.5 weeks of the season? They played the Marlins twice. They played almost every team in the American League. Of course, I'm kidding around when I say that. But they started off in Houston. They were 1-2. All right, fine. They lost 2 out of 3 last week to the Twins. And the Twins, they just got swept by the Braves, who the Braves have been awful, as we know. So it's not as if the Twins have been world beaters, to say the least. They just finished the Cardinals. They polished them off in a 4-game sweep. I get it. Understand. It's all love. And the Cardinals, in their own right, they came into the series at 500, and now they left here with a record of 9-13, 4 games under 500. All right, so you could blame the Mets for that, but still, 500 team. And I talked about this on Thursday's podcast. Is there parity in Major League Baseball? Well, you want to go back and check that out if you're wondering if I'm off my rocker. But then they also had a scenario where they went to Oakland, or to Sacramento, excuse me, and they won 2 out of 3 there. They swept the Blue Jays in the opening series of the year at home at Citi Field, and they've done what they've had to do. All right, so the Blue Jays have been maybe the one competitive team that they could look at and hang their hat on. Fine, no problem. But when you play the Marlins twice, an average, now below average Cardinal team, the Twins, you lost 2 out of 3 in Minnesota, and they are what, 7-14, or maybe even 7-15 at this point. And the Astros, it's not as if they're the Astros of a few years ago coming off a World Series. So you have to, I hate to say it, despite the fact, all right, you beat the teams in front of you, whether they're awful, bad, putrid, they still have to play the White Sox, they still have to play Colorado 6 times, maybe 7, depending on the way the schedule breaks. There's going to be a lot of bad teams on their schedule, Pirates, etc., and you can only play those teams that are in front of you. Trust me. I get it. But it's not as if they've beaten the Yankees. It's not as if they've beaten the Dodgers, the Padres, the Giants, the D-backs. It's not as if they've beaten the powerhouse of the sport. And I get it. There's going to be a day and time where they're going to face those teams. Aha. Guess what? They will face those teams. A team in their own division starting tonight. Citi Field, a rematch of the division series where the Phillies come up the turnpike to play the Mets in a 3-game set, which is now going to be an early season litmus test. And people say, well, JAYREELZ, pump the brakes. We saw them win a division series last year. They beat them in 4. We're not afraid of Phillies. And I'm not trying to say, oh, we got to shake in our boots because they are the stepchild to the South there in the city of brotherly love. No, not in the least. But now the competition ramps up here a little bit. And even though they go to Washington before over the weekend, and Washington can be feisty, and yes, the schedule comes back to them a little bit, but now it rises up. And even though Francisco Lindor said the right thing, saying, all right, now we got the Phillies coming in, competition, the fans came out in full bloom over the weekend, so good to see the ballpark filled there at Citi Field. But now, these 3 games is the big series of the week. Let's see how the Mets stack up. I would think they're going to do well, and their starting pitching has just been outlandish. Kodai Senga has been phenomenal. Got to give it up for Griffin Canning. I know Clay Holmes had a decent start there yesterday. And the team, listen, Pete Alonso's been just, well, more than what we could ever expect. And I understand it's a walk year. You can opt out after this year, get the big bucks. So that's what happens when you have Juan Soto hitting in front of you. But now let's see. These next 3 games are going to be huge. Now, I don't think there's going to be an asterisk next to it. I know that this is kind of clickbaity. And you know I don't subscribe to that. But it is a legitimate question to use that word in the sentence where I said, is this start legit or should there be an asterisk because of the schedule? Now, yes, the schedule is what it is, and you can factor that in, and you can debate me on that, and I'll be the first to tell you, yeah, Mets will play nobody. But, again, it is legit because let's say if the Mets lost those games with the Twins and even the Astros maybe notwithstanding, let's say if they would have lost 2 out of 3 to the Marlins in Miami or lost 2 out of 3 to the Blue Jays, considering that they are a good team, or would have lost or just split against or maybe even lost 3 out of 4 to the Cardinals. People are going to say, oh, Mets are off to a bad start. They need to beat those teams, so on and so forth. So there is a flip side to it. I get it. But it is legit. But you know there's going to be some that are going to say, oh, it's the schedule, it's the schedule. So I bring it to you guys and gals' attention. As a Met fan, And you can answer it accordingly. And if you want to leave a comment, please feel free and do so. And we could go back and forth on that question as far as the Mets and their hot start. And then the other thing is, and I'm just going to bring up the closer, Devin Williams of the Yankees. Now, the Yankees, they should have swept the Rays over the weekend, and they did win 3 out of 4, and Boone gets ejected again, balls and strikes with Aaron Judge, and I know he had a home run, which I couldn't even tell based on what I saw on my computer, and I'm sure it was probably fair based on some people I spoke to. They thought the home run was fair, and it got taken away, and of course the foul pole there in left field, it only goes up about, 20 feet, not maybe 30 or 40 feet in a major league ballpark, because remember the Rays are playing in the Yankees minor league complex or the minor league ballpark that they played during spring training. But for Devin Williams, let's get back to him. Here's a guy that was traded from Milwaukee to the Yankees as one of the top closers in the sport. And we get it. The last time we saw Devin Williams prior to a Yankee uniform, he was taken out of the yard by Pete Alonso in a winner-take-all wildcard game in Milwaukee. And who knows? Is that still in his head? Maybe coming to New York was the worst thing. Maybe he's reminded on the street, if anybody can recognize him, about thank you, Devin Williams, for the gopher pitch that you threw to Alonso so the Mets could advance to play against the Phillies. And just like I mentioned, they beat the Phillies and went on to play the Dodgers, as we all know. But for Williams, I understand this could be another overreaction, overstating JAYREELZ. It's 3.5 weeks into the season. But you wonder his mental makeup. We know he has the physical ability with that airbender pitch, that changeup that just is elusive and it just drops and falls from the air, and it's just a wicked pitch. Understood. But Williams, you have to consider what's between his ears at this point, because he is a far cry from the guy who was how many saves last year, and he had a 1.8 ERA, maybe 1.80. Let me see if I can pull up his stats real quick from last year. Now, I don't know if they're going to have him right quick in front of me, but for this year and for what he has done to this point, granted, it is a very small sample size, and we understand that he's going to get better as we move it along here. But as I pull it up, Devin Williams at this current moment, 8 innings pitched, 11 hits. His ERA is at 9, so every time he comes in, he's giving up a run, and he's walked the ballpark, 7 walks in 8 innings, and he's given up how many hits again? 11 hits, so his whip is through the roof, and yes, he has plenty of time to right the ship. Understood, and you would think that's going to be the case, because remember last year, Clay Holmes went through the first 6-7 weeks of the season without giving up a run, and after that, he couldn't lock down a save if his life depended on it, as he gave up on blue saves in the double digits. So I would think the only way for Devin Williams now is to go up. But I'm sure the Yankee fan right now is asking themselves, is this guy all of a sudden a shell of his old self? And if he continues this way, who knows? They may have to ship him out of here, because if the Yankee fan is going to start to boo, and one more time, not knowing what's in his chest and between his ears, this could be a long season for number 38, the closer that they thought was going to be a lockdown 9th inning, no ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it, for a Yankee bullpen that's been very good this year. But who knows how much longer Williams is going to last in this position, or even last on the team for that matter, if it continues to go awry. So just keep that in mind as we move it along. But as far as the rest of the Major League Baseball schedule in the weekend, not much to really get into. I know the Padres lost 2 out of 3 in Houston, as the NL West is obviously the most competitive division of all. When you have the Diamondbacks at 13-9, and they're just a game behind the Dodgers and 3 games behind the Padres in the division, or I should say a game behind the Giants and 2 games behind the Dodgers in that uber competitive division. And then the Cubs, who lead the Central by a game over the Brewers, and the Reds have played well here as of late, although at 500, but still creeping up there as far as the Central is concerned. We talked about the NL East with the Mets and Phillies going at it here. Mets have a 2-game lead over the Phillies as they have their showdown at Citi Field over the next 3 days. And then Texas still in the top spot there in the West. The Tigers and Guardians are going at it, as the Yankees will invade Cleveland for the next 3 days, which should be interesting. It's a rematch of the ALCS of last year. And then the Yankees and Blue Jays, as well as the Red Sox, who are playing right now with the White Sox up 1-0 because it is President's Day. Also Boston Marathon Day up in Beantown. So I don't know. I'm sure the finisher there since they start at 9 a.m. I don't know if there's any records that were set. Maybe I'll pull that up there at the end for those who are into running, and Lord knows I am. But you have the Red Sox looking to take 3 out of 4 against the White Sox as they won the first 2 games of that series, and the White Sox won there yesterday. So baseball, that's what you have there. And the schedule for the week, now it's 1-1 as I see top of the third. That game again start at 11 o'clock. A little bit of late recording for yours truly, but yeah, I've been in a slumber all morning. Hopefully it's not showing, whether it's in my voice or on camera, as you're watching the video, of course, on YouTube or Spotify. And I thank you for tuning in as well. But the schedule here for the early part of the week, Yankees in Cleveland, as you know. Then you have the Reds in Miami for 3. San Diego at Detroit, good series there. Philly, New York, St. Louis at Atlanta. Toronto and Houston, Milwaukee, San Francisco, very good series there. Then you have your Beltway series between Baltimore and Washington, where Baltimore got spanked. And this is another thing which I don't know what the sport can do, but we have to stop with the position players mopping up these games and the 8th and 9th inning. Did you see what happened there yesterday in Camden Yards? Where, all right, 24-2, it was a football score where the Reds beat the Orioles there at Camden Yards. But when you have Jorge Mateo and Gary Sanchez close out your game, listen, you got to have one mop-up guy that's just going to give you outs or innings. And I understand you're not going to throw in your closer there. Totally get it. But you have to have one guy that is going to take a beating, whether he throws 85 miles an hour and can't break a pane of glass, but he is a serviceable Major League pitcher. You can't throw up these guys, these position players to map out or wipe out these games or somehow mop up these games, as I can't even articulate it because I'm tired of seeing this. And baseball has to do something about it, because when you see 24-2, that is not good for your sport. And when you see that their position players just giving up runs left and right, and I understand the game's out of reach and you don't want to waste your bullpen, but this is where you need to have a mop-up guy. This is where you need to have a guy at 10-2 in the 7th inning say, you know what, take us through the rest of this game. If you take a beating and you give up 9 runs in the final 3 innings, at least the guy knows his role. He's just there to clean up the mess, and that's it. And even if he makes it more of a mess, it's still his job to close it out. Do not give it to the position player. You might as well just call me up and say, hey, JAYREELZ, come on down here. We'll give you $1,000 for the next 2 innings to just mop it up. And even if you get lit up like a Christmas tree, that's fine, but that's your job. You know what? I'll put on the spikes. I'll try to throw it up there at 60 miles an hour and see what happens. If I get shelled, if I get embarrassed, hey, better me than to have a Major League Baseball player who plays the infield or outfield or even catches is going to do probably the same amount of job that I would do if I was towing the rubber. So I don't know what baseball's going to do there, but that was just a god-awful sight for not only just a baseball fan, but even a sports fan to see, hey, why are position players pitching to these guys? Don't they have pitchers on the team? Yeah, it's embarrassing to answer that. So baseball, let's do a little bit better when it comes to that. Or these teams that are managing rosters, come on, let's step up our game here. But that's what you have there with that game and that series, where the Reds and the Orioles, they're in for a long season right now. And I get it, they don't have pitching, but the Mets don't really have pitching, and look what they're doing. So, and they haven't hit either. Gunnar Henderson's batting .220 since he returned. Jordan Westberg's at the Mendoza line. Ryan Mountcastle hasn't hit. Jackson Holliday's at .220. I mean, the whole team, and I haven't even talked about Adley Rutschman. So that's all you need to know about the Orioles here in this early part of the season. And let me see, any other series of note? Seattle at Boston. Then you have Dodgers and Cubs again for the 8 millionth time. And I get it. They played in Tokyo, then they played at Dodger Stadium a couple weeks ago, and then now here they are going to Wrigley. So you're going to see them for the last time this year, unless they meet up in October. Let's see. That's it. Toronto, Houston, Texas at the Athletics. And then you have the Dregs, Pittsburgh at Anaheim. And Anaheim's played good. I got to give it up. The Angels have played well. So I got to give them a pop. But that's what you have there with baseball. And then to wrap up here, and as the NFL, as I put the helmet and shoulder pads on, I know it's draft week. And everybody's going to be geeked up on what's going to go on. But I got news for you. I understand that the draft is quarterback driven. And it's heavily relied on where the quarterbacks are going to go. Now, we know Cam Ward's going to go one, at least so we think, to the Tennessee Titans. And then after that, whether it's Shedeur Sanders, the second quarterback taken, or even Jackson Dart, the third quarterback taken, well, a lot of people thought Jackson Dart was going to be second round in a lock. But right now, he's moved up the draft board, maybe at a reach to see whether or not he creeps into the first round, which he possibly can do when it's all said and done. But I have to say, there hasn't been a lot of buzz surrounding this draft, if you ask me. And not to say that there has to be nonstop action or nonstop news coming out of the Adam Schefters of the world or the Ian Rappaports. I get that, and I'm sure as you get deeper into the week, as you get to Tuesday, Wednesday, and obviously Thursday, where there may be some trades consummated or a situation where you're going to have a player fall once the draft takes place, and it's going to be in Green Bay this year, whereas we know now they're moving around all over the country. It used to be at Radio City, where I went, if not every year, every other year, and I kind of wish it went back to that. But of course, the NFL is NFLing again, where they have to spread the wealth. Other cities make money as if the NFL doesn't make enough money. But I digress. I won't get on my soapbox, as I've talked about on this podcast, as well as vlogs. If you haven't paid attention to, check the vlogs, my sports vlogs, for some NFL just commentary when it comes to yours truly and how I feel about the Shield and the league overall. But again, one more time, I'll shut up on that. But yeah, not really much going on. Yes, we could talk about Travis Hunter, where he's going to go. We could talk about Abdul Carter with his foot injury, where he's going to go. He's probably going to be maybe in the top 2 or 3 in the draft. Shedeur Sanders, I read a mock draft that he could go with the Raiders. Now, why would he go to the Raiders where they just signed Geno Smith for 2 years? You think Shedeur Sanders wants to take a backseat for 2 years? And even though Geno Smith, who will be under center, and with Pete Carroll, I'm sure Pete Carroll and Shedeur Sanders will fit in nicely, but Shedeur is going to want to play. And if the Raiders are going to take Shedeur there, all right, fine. Now, there's just one mock draft I saw, and you can't really take these mock drafts seriously, and I certainly don't, whether it's the NBA or even the NFL for that matter, NHL and Major League Baseball on a lesser note, because we all know the draft is all about what happens on the gridiron and the hardwood when those players come out of college. But for this draft upcoming, and yes, we could talk about maybe certain receivers, where they're going to go, the Matthew Goldens of the world and guys like that, and where certain linemen and other players that maybe in the top 10 could drop down. I know, will the Patriots take Aston Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State, at 4, where they have Ramondre Stevenson, and a lot of teams don't want to draft a running back that high. When you look at a guy like Ezekiel Elliott years ago, or even Saquon Barkley, where I understand he panned out, and look at him, Super Bowl champ at all. But who knows? That we'll have to wait and see. The tight ends there, whether your name is Colston Loveland, as well as Tyler Warren, those are guys that could go up, maybe even in the top 15. That we'll have to wait and see. So Jackson Dart, as I look at here, he could probably go 9, which wouldn't be far from Mississippi to Louisiana, as the Saints are going to need a quarterback, considering the scenario regarding Derek Carr, the quarterback, and his shoulder. He may not even suit up at all this year. So you know the Saints are going to have to draft a quarterback, and they're going to have to try to get themselves back on the beam, especially in a division which maybe not as wide open, but certainly open enough with Carolina, with the Buccaneers, as well as the Falcons there. They probably feel they'll have as good as a shot if they bring in a quarterback and maybe have the success of Jaden Daniels last year that maybe Jackson Dart could have this year. That remains to be seen. And with any other picks, I'll talk more about on Thursday's podcast to see, and I'm not going to have a mock draft of my own people. I'm not going to go there. But any other rumblings, any other things that could transpire here between now and Thursday, you know I'll keep you guys and gals apprised of what's happening as we get set for the 3 days. The first round there on Thursday night, second and third rounds on Friday, and then rounds 4 through 7 there on Saturday. As yes, the NFL back in our consciousness yet again. I understand they had a bit of a respite here. They said, all right, let March Madness do its thing and let it cook, as well as the Final Four and all the Masters. All right, Rory, yeah, you did your thing. Good for you. Oh, the baseball season, raised the curtain. All right, fine. Oh, NHL, NBA playoffs underway. All right, fine. Now it's time for us to take a stranglehold, and it's only the draft. You would think games are being played or it's preseason. No, but we understand that the NFL just sucks all the oxygen out of the sports room when it comes to what they do, and it doesn't matter. The draft could be at 3 a.m. in Green Bay in the middle of the night, shown on the Cooking Network, and guess what? It'll probably get a better rating than the Sunday night baseball game, or maybe even a first-round NBA playoff game, and maybe even better than a first-round National Hockey League playoff game. So when you put that into consideration, that's where you know the Shield has all the power when it comes to the sports universe. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. And if you haven't done so, people, as I implore you to do each and every time, one more time, as an independent podcaster, content creator that I am, I need all the support I could get. And thankfully, I got a little bit of boost there with the YouTube channel, with subscribers, as I'm the little engine that could, trying to get to 1,000 and trying to monetize what I do, the thing that I love, talking sports, to try to generate some income. Because yes, this is my full-time job, people, so I got to pay the bills somehow. So with your help, please subscribe, rate, review, like, comment on YouTube at JAYREELZ, as well as Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Please download, take a screenshot, send them to me, send it to your family, friends, foes, frenemies, to the good, the casual, the great, the diehard, the kook sports fan in your life. Send it to them. Again, screenshot, send it to me. I'll send a screenshot to everybody, to the masses, because when you're an independent creator like I am, I need, one more time, as much assistance, as much support that I could get. So if you could go ahead and do that, I sincerely appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. And if you have a question, comment, or suggestion, feel free to hit me up on any of my socials. Of course, one more time, on YouTube at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I always like to say. Ever since I came out of the womb, I've been talking sports. It's what I do. It's what I've done. Eat, sleep, breathe, digest, regurgitate, all of it. And if you couldn't hear it over the past hour into this microphone through your earbuds or speakers, or visually watching it on your phone, tablet, TV, computer, etc., then maybe you have to come back on Thursday. Maybe you have to rewind to the other podcasts that I had in the past, or the vlogs that I put up, or other content, even lifestyle content on the channel. Yes, I got it all, people. So please lock in, keep yourself tapped in, because as long as I'm sitting in front of this camera and this microphone, I promise you, I will deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.